particular cruelty in the act of naming things. Not the ordinary naming, not what you call a dog or a street or a child. I mean the naming that happens when power needs a container. When something enormous and nameless and terrifying needs to be made manageable. When the architects of consequence sit around a table and decide that the thing they are building, the thing that will split the atom and the century simultaneously, will be called a project. The Manhattan Project, as if it were a proposal. A blueprint for a modest apartment building, a thing with a budget and a timeline and a satisfying ribbon cutting at the end. I was part of that naming. I was the final layer of it, the smallest, most intimate act of categorization in the entire apparatus. I took a man's face, pressed it behind laminate and acetate, stamped a number across his chest and said, "You are authorized to know what you know and nothing more." And the extraordinary thing, the thing that has haunted me through every decade, I have spent in drawers, in archives, in museum cases, in estate sale boxes, is that they were grateful for it. They pinned me to their lapels like a medal. Age 1. The architecture of secrecy. The badge remembers Los Alamos. 1943, 1944, I remember being made. Not the way a human remembers being born, with warmth and noise and the shock of cold air. I remember it the way all objects remember, through what was pressed into me, through the weight of the decision that preceded me. Somewhere in Washington, D.C., in a building whose address no one was supposed to write down, a man named Leslie Groves had a problem. He had assembled, in the desert of New Mexico, the greatest single concentration of scientific intellect in the history of the human species. Theoretical physicists, chemists, mathematicians, engineers whose particular genius was in understanding things that could not be seen with the naked eye. He had gathered them in a place that officially did not exist, a post office box address, a plateau above the Rio Grande, a town that appeared on no civilian map, and he needed to control them, not their work. The work was going beautifully, in the way that only work funded by pure existential terror can go beautifully. He needed to control what they knew, what they said to one another, what passed between a physicist eating breakfast and a chemist passing the sugar. Groves had a phrase for it, compartmentalization, and it was, in its way, the most ambitious social engineering project of the 20th century. The idea was elegant in its brutality. No one man should understand the whole. Each scientist would know only the fragment assigned to him, and the fragments would be kept apart by walls of clearance, of classification, of need to know. The bomb would be assembled not only from uranium and plutonium and precise mechanical violence, but from human ignorance, carefully maintained, carefully weaponized. I was the physical manifestation of that policy. I was issued to a young man. I will call by his first name only, because even now, even across 80 years, the instinct toward discretion sits in my laminate like a second soul. His name was Robert. Not that Robert, though they shared the mesa and occasionally shared a cafeteria table. This Robert was 26 years old, and he had come to Los Alamos from the University of Chicago, and he had the particular quality of face that certain physicists have, a quality of being present and absent simultaneously, as though one half of his attention was always solving an equation that the visible world had not yet given him. He was given to me on a Tuesday morning in the autumn of 1943. I remember the first time he put me in his shirt pocket, the warmth of him, the particular warmth that lives just above the sternum, that hollow where a man's heartbeat is loudest when he is anxious. And Robert was anxious, in that particular way of a man who has been given access to a secret so large it has changed the dimensions of the room he stands in. His heart rate pressing against me through the fabric was not the stuttering panic of a frightened man. It was the elevated metronomic rhythm of someone who has decided to be equal to a thing that may, in fact, be larger than he is. Psychological reveal. Here is what I understood about Robert in those first weeks, pressed against his chest. He did not entirely believe he was supposed to be there. This is not self-deprecation. This is something more precise and more interesting. Robert was brilliant, genuinely, demonstrably brilliant, and he knew it the way a carpenter knows the weight of a hammer, practically and without drama. But there was something else, a countercurrent beneath the confidence. He had grown up on the East Coast in a family that appreciated achievement as a form of elegance. He had been told, in the sophisticated vocabulary of his upbringing, that excellence was expected, and so excellence had become for him not a thing he pursued but a thing he owed, a debt he could never quite finish paying. Coming to Los Alamos, receiving me, was the largest payment yet. When he showed me to his wife through a chain-link fence at the edge of the technical area, her eyes moving from the photograph to his face and back again, he stood a little straighter. Not with pride exactly, with relief. As if the badge confirmed something he had needed confirmed. As if the laminate and the number and the government stamp said what he could not say himself. I am sufficient. I have been judged sufficient. Here's the proof, pinned to my chest. The Mesa in 1943 had a specific grammar. Everything spoken was in code or in half sentences that tapered off at the edges, the speaker trusting the listener to understand that the rest could not be said. Men who had spent their careers in the open conversation of academic science, who had published, who had corresponded across oceans, who had built their identities around the free exchange of idea, now spoke in fragments. They ate together and discussed their children and the poor quality of the commissary coffee and said nothing, absolutely nothing about the work, except with their eyes. I watched it happen across the lunch tables as Robert sat across from men, whose badge numbers I recognized from weeks of proximity to him. Men he would nod at, men whose expressions would shift by a fraction of a degree when they saw each other. A micro-movement around the orbital muscles that said, I know what you... No, I know that you know that I know. We are carrying this together, and we will not say so, and somehow that is its own form of conversation. The badge was a part of that language. When a man's clearance level determined what he could know, the badge became a form of social grammar. The number told you whether a conversation was possible, whether the words in your mouth were legal to speak. I was carried by hundreds of men on that mesa, and in my witnessing I learned that there is a particular intimacy to shared secrecy. That human beings, deprived of language, find other ways to tell each other, I am not alone in this weight. Age 2. The Physics of Guilt. July 1945, the weeks before and after. I remember July the way I imagine a wound remembers a knife, not the mechanics of it, the temperature. By the summer of 1945, the work had arrived at its final mathematics. The theoretical had become the architectural, and the architectural had become the mechanical, and the mechanical had become the real. Trinity was coming, the test in the Jornada del Muerto desert, the journey of the dead man, whose name no one seemed to find ominous enough to be meaningful. Robert had changed. The man I had been pressed against for 2 years was still recognizable. The same hands, the same heartbeat slightly elevated in the mornings, the same way of reaching into his breast pocket to adjust me when he was thinking. But something in the architecture of his attention had shifted. He had begun to understand in a way that the early months of abstraction had insulated him from what the thing he was building was. This is a cognitive phenomenon that has no clean scientific name, though it perhaps should. The moment at which a human being translates the abstract into the concrete, when the equation acquires mass, when the theory develops weight and heat and the specific capability to end lives in the hundreds of thousands. Some of the men never made the translation. They stayed, by choice or by psychological necessity, in the elegant language of physics, where everything is interaction and energy and force and nothing is a child running in the street of a Japanese city in the summer. Robert had made the translation. I could feel it. I know that is not the sort of statement a badge is supposed to make. I am laminate and metal and a compressed photograph, and I do not have nerve endings. But I had been against his chest for long enough to know his rhythms the way a river knows its banks. And in July of 1945, his heartbeat had acquired a second quality underneath the usual anxiety. Something slower. Something that did not accelerate with work or quicken with problem solving. A low, persistent current of something that in a human being I can only describe as dread. Second, psychological reveal. Here is the thing about the men of Los Alamos that history has not quite captured in its full complexity. They believed they were stopping a war. I do not say this sardonically. I say it because it is true, and because the truth of it is part of what makes the whole machinery so tragic. The intelligence coming through the technical area spoke of a Japanese program, of German progress before the German collapse, of a Soviet appetite for exactly this knowledge. The men who were building the bomb were building it, in their own understanding of themselves, as a shield. They were not men who wanted war. They were, many of them, men who had fled fascism and watched their families destroyed by exactly the kind of world they were now laboring to prevent. Robert had a particular version of this. He had come of age in a world where the failure to act, the diplomatic paralysis, the appeasement, the willingness to let evil advance on the theory that confrontation was worse, had produced a war that killed tens of millions of people. He had taken from this a lesson that was specific and unshakable. The innocent suffer when the capable stand aside. And so he built. And the building was, in a very real sense, an act of love, a violent, technically precise, morally catastrophic act of love, aimed at a future in which this particular shape of catastrophe might be deterred. The men of Los Alamos were not monsters. They were human beings who loved the world enough to accept becoming something monstrous in its defense. Trinity happened on July 16, 1945 at 5:29 in the morning. I was not there. Robert left me behind, in his desk drawer, in the technical area, locked away with the formality of security protocol. This was standard. The observation bunkers 10,000 yards from the tower had their own credentialing, their own apparatus of authorization, and a badge from the main facility was not what you needed in the desert at 5 in the morning, waiting for the world to change. So I waited. And I have thought, in the 80 years since, about the particular quality of that waiting. The drawer was metal, slightly cold, even in July. There were other badges in there. He had accumulated several over the years, replacements and alternates and older versions whose photographs showed a slightly younger face, a slightly less weighted expression. We lay together in the dark and we waited, and none of us knew what we were waiting for because none of us had ever waited for this particular thing before. The moment it happened, the moment the device detonated, I am told that the light reached the observation bunkers before the sound, because light always does. That the desert was briefly transformed into something that resembled the interior of a star. That the men watching, many of them weeping, some of them laughing with a hysteria that had nowhere else to go, shielded their eyes against a sunrise that had never happened before and would never happen again in quite this way. One of them quoted the Bhagavad Gita afterward. "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." He was not wrong. But I have always thought the quote gestures at the sensation rather than the fact. The sensation was of a threshold crossed, of a door opened, that had no mechanism for closing. The fact was simpler and more terrible. They had done it. The thing worked. When Robert came back to the technical area several hours later and opened the drawer and reached in for me, out of habit, out of routine, the practiced morning ritual of a man who had worn a badge for 2 years, I felt the difference immediately. His hands were cold, not from the desert night, which was long finished, cold from the inside. The specific temperature of a man who has looked at something he cannot unlook at, and understood, for the first time in a way that moved through his body and not just his mind, that there is no version of this that ends cleanly. He pinned me on. He went to work. Third psychological reveal. In the weeks between Trinity and Hiroshima, there was a petition. 70 scientists at the Chicago Metallurgical Laboratory on men who had worked on the weapon, men who had given the same years and the same secrecy and the same quiet, grinding moral negotiation to the project, signed a document addressed to the President of the United States. It asked that Japan be given a demonstration, that the weapon be shown in some uninhabited theater before it was used on human beings, that the United States declare its terms and give the Japanese government time to consider them before the cities burned. The petition did not reach the president in time, or it reached him in a form that had been reordered and diminished. The historical record on this is specific and available to anyone who wishes to read it, and I will not reconstruct it here. What what matters to me, what I felt through Robert's chest in those weeks, was something different. He knew about the petition. He had not signed it. I do not know why. The historical record does not tell me, and he never said it aloud in a place where I could hear it. And I am aware that the weight of inference across 80 years can construct a false psychology with tremendous confidence. But I know what his heartbeat was like in those weeks. And it had the specific rhythm of a man who is at war with himself and has decided, for reasons he has not fully articulated even to himself, to stand down, to let the machinery complete its motion, to trust, with a faith that was at least partly an exhaustion, that the decision was above him. There is a word for this, and it is not cowardice. It is not courage either. It is something more ordinary and more devastating than either. It is the recognition of one's own smallness inside a system that has outgrown the capacity of any one conscience to redirect it. The bomb was going to fall. He knew it. And he had decided, in the particular way that decent men decide terrible things, that since it was going to fall regardless, his opposition would cost him something and change nothing. And so he folded himself back into the work and let the calendar turn. Age 3, the long afterward, 1945, 1954, and beyond. The world did not end, of course. That is the central irony of my existence, and I have had 80 years to sit with it. The world did not end. It continued, louder than before, more anxious than before, carrying a new quantity of fear in its pockets like a stone that everyone agreed not to name. But it continued. Cities were rebuilt. Children were born. Science moved forward in the particular way that science does, unstoppably, brilliantly, without any mechanism for pausing to ask whether the forward motion is wisdom. But something had ended. The before and after of August 6, 1945 is not a historical abstraction. It is a real thing. Something in the structure of human self-understanding, the thing that had previously allowed a person to imagine that civilization was a direction rather than a balance, had been rearranged. Robert felt it before most people did. He had been given after the war a position of tremendous influence. He chaired committees. He advised governments. He spoke to rooms full of powerful people about the technology they had made and what must happen next. He wore me to some of these meetings, and in the wearing of me I had the feeling, which is not quite a feeling in any mechanistic sense, but which I can only describe as a feeling of profound ambiguity. I was the credential that opened these rooms. I was also the record of the thing that had made the credential matter. Both things were true simultaneously, pressed between laminate and lapel. He had begun to speak publicly about what he called the terror. Not in those words exactly. He was a precise man, always, and he understood that terror was not the right word for a policy conversation. But underneath the policy language, when the meetings ended and the rooms emptied and he sat in a chair in an office in Princeton, that is the word I felt against his chest. Not guilt exactly, or not guilt alone. Something closer to a responsibility, so vast it had exceeded its container, spilled out of the original act that produced it, and become simply the atmosphere through which he now moved. Psychological reveal. By 1949, the Soviet Union had tested its own device. Robert had predicted this. He had said it to anyone who would listen in the precise, unhurried language of a man who has run the numbers and is not surprised by the answer. He had said, "They will have it in 4 years," and he had been correct, and being correct had given him no satisfaction whatsoever, and which is one of the symptoms of wisdom. The way that certain forms of terrible knowledge stop being interesting once they are confirmed. The question being argued in Washington in 1949 was whether to build the hydrogen bomb, the super, as it was called in the technical areas, the weapon that would make the Hiroshima device look like a preliminary sketch. Robert was asked his opinion. He gave it. No, not because it cannot be done, because it should not be. Because we are moving in a direction that has no destination compatible with the continued existence of civilization, and we should stop. He was not the only man who thought this. He was, however, one of the only men of his particular stature who said it. I want to say something about courage here that is not cliché. What Robert did in those years, the testimony, the public statements, the willingness to stand in rooms full of the powerful and say this is wrong, was not the heroic courage of a film. It did not feel from inside his chest like the elevated heartbeat of a man advancing on something. It felt like the slow, grinding, nauseating courage of a man who is afraid, who knows the cost, who has made a clear-eyed calculation of what his position is likely to produce in terms of consequence, and who speaks anyway because the alternative is to add another room to the architecture of his private silence. He had stayed silent once. He would not stay silent again. The heartbeat against me in those years was different from every previous version I had known. It was lower, more deliberate. The rhythm of a man who has stopped performing confidence and begun simply being as honest as the air will allow. In 1953, the Atomic Energy Commission, at the instigation of men who found his opinions inconvenient and his influence dangerous, opened a security hearing against him. The charge, formalized in bureaucratic language, was that he was a security risk, that his loyalties were questionable, that the man who had built the bomb could not be trusted with the knowledge of what to do next. The hearing lasted 4 weeks. I was not in the room during the hearing. By then I had been retired, placed in a drawer, superseded by newer credentials for a man whose position had evolved. But I knew, in the way that objects know things, through the accumulation of their history, through the record pressed into their material over years of contact, I knew what was happening. They were using the structure of secrecy to destroy. The man who had served that secrecy best, the compartmentalization, the need to know, the same system that I had been part of, the same architecture of controlled information that had allowed the project to exist, was now being used as a weapon against its most distinguished product. His former statements were read back to him. His wartime associations were cataloged. Conversations held in confidence, in private, in the intimacy of close working relationships, were opened and examined and used as evidence of unreliability. The commission found him to be a security risk. It stripped him of his clearance. It did not strip him of me. I was already in a drawer. But it did something that I have always found, in my long meditation on these events, to be the most precise form of cruelty available to institutions. It made his integrity into a liability. It took the very qualities, the willingness to dissent, the commitment to honest assessment, the refusal to perform confidence he did not feel, that had made him valuable, and reframed them as dangerous. Psychological reveal. And here is what I think Robert understood in the years after the hearing, that the project was never really about the bomb. The bomb was the product. The project, the real one, the one that no one officially named, was the discovery that human beings, given sufficient urgency and sufficient resources, can exceed every moral limit they have previously set for themselves and feel, while doing it, that they are acting from their deepest values. That is the finding of Los Alamos, not the fission, not the implosion design, not even the terrible efficiency of what 2 bombs accomplished in Japan in August 1945. The finding is this, that the distance between civilization and its opposite is not a wall but a gradient, and that brilliant, careful, loving people can traverse that gradient in increments so small that no single step feels like the one that changed everything. He spent the last decade of his life. He died in 1967, relatively young, of throat cancer, the smoking having done what the years of radiation exposure perhaps accelerated, in a kind of public dignity that masked a private reckoning I can only partially read across the decades. He gave lectures. He received honorary degrees. In 1963, President Kennedy announced that he would receive the Enrico Fermi Award, a rehabilitation of a kind. Though the security clearance was never restored, he accepted it with grace. He accepted everything with grace by the end. Grace was what he had. When the arguments were finished and the committees had rendered their judgments and the history had moved on to new urgencies, a quiet, contained, slightly formal grace that was indistinguishable from exhaustion if you were not paying close attention. I am always paying close attention. What I carry now, I have been in this case for 11 years. Before that, I spent decades in a cardboard box in the estate of a man whose name I was never formally told. One of the administrators, I believe, from the shape of what I remember. A man whose heartbeat was never anxious because he understood his function to be procedural and was at peace with that. Before the cardboard box, a filing cabinet. Before the filing cabinet, a desk drawer in a building that no longer exists. Before the desk drawer, a chest of drawers in a house on Bathtub Row in Los Alamos, New Mexico, beside a man who lay awake at night with a specific quality of wakefulness that I have never encountered since. I have watched thousands of people look at me. This is the final thing I want to tell you because it is the thing that no archive or historical record can contain. The faces of the people who look at me are not the faces of people looking at history. They are the faces of people looking at themselves. The young woman who held her phone up to photograph me last Tuesday, she was perhaps 19, wearing a university sweatshirt, holding a cup of coffee with her free hand. Her expression was not academic. It was something more intimate and more troubled. She looked at the photograph behind the laminate, the face of a young man not much older than her, pressed and authorized and numbered and aimed at the end of the world, and for a moment, her coffee hand went very still. She was asking the question that everyone asks, standing in front of the objects that outlived the people who made them. Could I have been this person? Could I, given the urgency and the intelligence and the genuine conviction that I was serving something larger than myself, could I have done this? The answer, the honest answer, the answer that my 80 years of lying against human chests has given me, is yes. Not because human beings are weak beings, because human beings are consistent, because the same qualities that produce Los Alamos, the capacity for sustained intellectual effort, the willingness to sublimate individual doubt to collective purpose, the deep human need to be equal to the moment one has been given, are not pathologies. They are the best of what human beings are. They are what makes cathedrals and symphonies and vaccines and libraries and every other beautiful, improbable thing that your species has made. They are also what makes bombs. I think about the July morning when Robert first picked me up from the administrator's table. The lightness of me in his hand. I weigh almost nothing, a few grams of laminate and metal. The smallness of the thing that would carry so much symbolic weight for so many years. He turned me over. He looked at the photograph. He did what everyone does when they see their official photograph. He examined it with the slight dissatisfaction of a person who recognizes themselves but does not quite recognize this particular version. The formal face, the reduced expression, the government-authorized likeness that is accurate without being true. Then he pinned me on, and I felt his heartbeat. And it was the heartbeat of a man who is about to begin something whose dimensions he cannot yet fully see. There is no moral I can offer you that is equal to what I have witnessed. I am not equipped for that. I am laminate and acetate and metal, and a photograph of a young man who is probably buried somewhere now, in ground that does not know what he knew. What I can offer is this. The people who built the end of the world were not different from you in any of the ways that matter. They ate breakfast. They worried about their children. They had opinions about coffee and found certain colleagues insufferable and wrote letters home that said nothing about the work because the work could not be named. They loved their country. They loved the idea of a future. They accepted credentials, pressed against their chests and wore them like the answer to a question they were always being asked. Who authorized you to be here? Who decided you were sufficient to know what you know? They were authorized by urgency, by the terrifying circumstance of being alive in a particular century, in a particular country, with a particular set of skills at a particular historical moment when those skills were the most consequential things on earth. And they did what people do. When history presses its full weight against the chest, they took a breath, and they went to work.